All right, everyone. Welcome to the closing plenary of day one.
And went across.
This plenary we'll actually wrap it up just after 5 o'clock. We know we're the last thing between you and happy hour and dinner. But we're focusing on one of the major themes of this conference is around the need for capital, which is a key lever in this systems approach to food waste. So I'm so excited to be joined on the panel by a spectrum of capital, ranging from foundations with Eileen and Devon from Walmart and Rockefeller, respectively, to public capital from Pogue at CalRecycle, and then to impact investing with Rein from MissionPoint Partners. One of the things I love, I've gotten to learn a lot about capital over the past year, and one of the things that I think is really meaningful actually about this diversity of funders is because I think they don't just fund separately, they actually fit together and are supportive of this broader need for capital in the space from diverse sources, whether that's philanthropic, whether that's impact-oriented where it's starting to get market returns but maybe not quite there, or whether it's achieving more of a public good as part of a state program. As I mentioned this morning in the opening remarks, just trends we're seeing in this space, we've called for an $18 billion investment over the next 10 years to achieve this $100 billion opportunity. And part of that is from these different sectors of capital represented here. So the macro trends from the philanthropic perspective, we've seen the giving rates go from 5 million annually in 2012 to 20 million annually in 2016. My team will be releasing a foundation investment tracker at this year's SOCAP conference in San Francisco to share more about what we're seeing about who's giving money, who's receiving money, and really what are the trends and impacts that we're starting to see in the space. I also mentioned that we're seeing more impact investment and also venture capital in the space. We're still fairly early days, and I'm excited to talk to Adam about what he's seen both as a parallel in some of the clean energy space as well. But we have seen the last 2 years since we last met, $100 million invested over about 7 or 8 it's $100 million in venture capital invested over 7 or 8 innovators and are starting to see, I think, the emergence of scale from an equity investment perspective. We also have Kyle Pogue, who runs CalRecycle, so that's both the 1383 organic landfill ban, which we'll hear more about, but also it's a grant program to help make sure there's the infrastructure in place from a prevention, recovery, and recycling perspective in the state of California. That's been also a surprise for us as we've been looking across different states, just how many state-level programs there are, often from the Departments of Environmental Protection. So we not only found out about programs here in Massachusetts, where there's an organics landfill ban, and in California, but also in states like Tennessee that may be unexpected actors, investing in innovators like Compost Nashville. I know it was one of the innovators that was invested in this past year. So really excited about the panel today. Thought I would just kick it off with brief intro. So Eileen from Walmart, Devon leads food strategy for Rockefeller, Kyle leads CalRecycle, and then Adam works at MissionPoint, which is an impact investor, but has a great history in clean tech, which is a fun parallel. First question is really around just what you're doing in this space, and maybe a personal passion point. Why do you care about this area? We're all mission-minded in our thinking, and I would love to hear just why you're engaged on this topic. Let me ask Eileen to start.
Yeah, thank you. So we've been investing in the issue of food waste and loss for a little while now. We have a longer history in funding and hunger relief, but now look at the issue from a broader spectrum, looking at prevention and recovery, and looking at the right role for philanthropic investment. I want to talk a little bit before diving into our exact agenda on food waste, just how philanthropy at Walmart Foundation fits into a bigger approach around food waste and loss. It's a really unique role to be a philanthropist attached to a company that has a clear strategy and purpose around addressing environmental and social challenges. We know our biggest lever for change is through our business and finding shared value opportunities where there's a business, it makes sense for business, but it also addresses environmental issues and social issues. And food waste and loss has a clear business case. I think many businesses in this room are working on that and seeing in doing that work. And Anna, my colleague over here, leads our work with the business on that work. Now, the unique role for philanthropy attached to a business is that we can see what are the system level barriers that are preventing an uptake in a market solution. What's stuck, right? Where do we need to invest in research to better understand the problem? Where do we need to bring philanthropic capital to de-risk a solution, maybe to unlock some of my other partners down the end of the road, their financing mechanisms, or to build capacity at scale. And so when we approach our food waste and loss investments, looking primarily, consumer-facing business, addressing it at that point in the chain, as well as farm, and looking at prevention and recovery solutions following the EPA hierarchy, we're looking for kind of where can we place philanthropy to be an unlock to an issue or a challenge that we haven't figured out how to address yet. Oh, I'm personal passion point? Okay, sorry. There's lots of reasons why we should be addressing food waste and loss. It makes sense from an environmental standpoint, a social standpoint. But I think going back to the core of how much inputs we're putting to create food and how we need to maximize. If we're going to put inputs and energy and we think about natural capital and resources and feeding the future, we need to be maximizing every single piece of food that's produced, right? And we cannot allow that to have loss that's happening throughout the chain. So I think that's really ultimately, there's many reasons to why this is an important topic in the connection, but reminding ourselves that if we're gonna put energy and natural capital towards something, we should be maximizing it the whole way.
Let's go down the road. Devon, you should go next.
Great, thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. So for those who don't know, the Rockefeller Foundation is a global foundation. We just turned 105 years old, and we have a very long history working in food security and agricultural development all around the world. About 2.5 years ago, we launched an initiative called YieldWise, which focuses on reducing food loss and waste by half. And a large part of YieldWise takes place across 3 different countries in Africa, where we're working with smallholder farmers to reduce loss that happens either on farm or between farm and market. And then the other branch of YieldWise takes place here in the US. And I think it was really important to us as a foundation to address this as a global issue and to think about all the forms that food loss and waste takes. I have yet to hear of a food system that is waste-free, but it looks different in different contexts. And so we're trying to advance solutions and changes in different contexts, in different geographies. Here in the US, I would say, to your question, Chris, our strategy has evolved over the last few years. And I think that's because we've been sort of surprised in the best way at the momentum and dynamism that the space has had. So 3 years ago, we really focused on awareness building and research, and we sponsored a number of events, and we helped to fund the creation of Further with Food, which is a great online hub. And now, as we can see from all the folks in this room, awareness doesn't feel like as much of a battle as it once was. I think now the question is, what do we do with folks that are interested in tackling this issue? And so in the last year or so, we've really been focusing on taking solutions that are fit for purpose, so fit for a sector, fit for a city, fit for a context, and trying to partner with others to bring those to scale. A number of our partners are in the room, so we've done some work with Food Rescue, and some of our partners in that space are here. I think Monica is here somewhere, talked earlier about our work with World Wildlife Fund to scale some solutions across the hotel sector and now other sectors. We're supporting NRDC to do some work with cities, and we have a very exciting announcement coming out later this week about a partnership on that front. So we've shifted our strategy a bit over time as the space has really grown. And from a personal passion standpoint, I would say, I was having a conversation the other day where I described food waste as a Swiss Army knife issue, and by that I mean sort of any problem you have in the food system, it feels like preventing food waste can help to fix it. And I think that's both an impact opportunity that we're all leveraging together, and also really sort of an educational opportunity. So there's a lot of conversations I have where, to your point, Eileen, like talking about food waste helps to educate people about all the natural resources that go into our system, or about the inequity in terms of food distribution and access, or about, climate effects of food production. So that's one of the things that I've found most sort of fulfilling about working on this over the last few years.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kyle Pogue with CalRecycle, and if you don't know hey Nora, if you don't know CalRecycle, we are California state agency responsible for recycling related all topics, and that covers a broad array of things. I am just absolutely thrilled to be here amongst you beautiful people. This is it's wonderful what you guys are doing out there in this space, and it means a lot to me. It's a driver for many reasons. I care about building healthy soils. I care about food insecurity issues and trying to be a small part of that solution. I will say we have more opportunity than ever within California based on some of the laws that we are working on there. Be glad to talk to you each about what we're doing in that area, but then also some of the funding opportunities that we have never had a chance to have. Now we have them. So we can help address food waste prevention and rescue issues and provide some funding in that area. Also helping build more traditional organics infrastructure and compost, anaerobic digestion, and other technologies. There's a dire need for that in California, and I will say when it comes to food rescue and prevention, we're more on the formative end of things, and we're learning, and I'll thank you all in advance for the questions that I'll probably be asking you. I've spoken to many of you in this room to get your feedback, and based on that feedback, I always joke about this, I'm considering you all part of Team Edible, because in California we're working on edible food regulations and we need your help in doing that. So consider yourselves members of Team Edible. So there are a lot of things that are driving us, and we have some great opportunities. So thanks for having me here.
Hi, I'm Adam Rein from MissionPoint here in Boston. We're an impact investing team that works with a small group of high net worth families and their family foundations who are very passionate about solving big environmental issues. And so we support them in developing unified strategies between the family investment arm and family foundations, and actually help them deploy capital into venture capital or private equity-like investments. MissionPoint spun out of the family office of Jesse and Betsy Fink, who many of you heard speak this morning. So part of our inspiration to focus on food waste is we already had been looking at food systems, we already been looking at recycling and waste, and they encouraged us to take a closer look at this sector. And that inspired on the foundation side some of the early support that created the ReFed organization, as well as funding a number of other great philanthropic organizations. And on the investment side, it's led us to make our first couple of investments in food waste businesses. As you'll learn, there's all types of private investors out there. So on the spectrum of risky to low risk, we're definitely risk seekers. We look for organizations with transformational ideas. And on the spectrum of local to national or global, we're on the scalable side. So there's a ton of great local organizations here, both here in the Boston community and many of the folks at this conference, but our team focuses more on trying to unlock some global change. And so I came out of the clean technology startup community, and for those innovators here, there's the world's largest clean tech incubator is just down the street. It's called Greentown Labs, a great place to grow your startup or social enterprise venture. But one thing working with folks who are passionate about climate change or renewable energy is it feels that no matter how big your company gets, the actions of government or what's happening in China is going to just dwarf whatever you can do to impact climate change. But when, through the work of ReFed, we started digging into the numbers and seeing food waste as an issue area, it's both massive, but also an issue that's sizable enough that it feels that the people in this room working together can make meaningful progress to solving it in the US and through other organizations globally. And the final piece is we spent a bunch of time in Washington, D.C., and it's one of the true bipartisan aligned issues, whether you care about hunger, environment, or families, whether you care about saving money or helping the poor. It's an issue that every person we've met can get on board, and I think it's exciting when so many other issues feel like they have gridlock.
Devon, Rockefeller made the first and largest commitment in this space to date. Can you talk about just how you thought about this space when you first started on this journey and how that's evolved? Maybe some of the ways you're focusing your attention in ways that really fit with Rockefeller's strategy.
Sure. So it's, I'm smiling because it hasn't been that long. It feels like it's.
Or the food waste space, right?
It feels like it's been a long time. But yeah, we've been exploring this space we probably started exploring the space about 5 years ago. And then, as I said, we launched YieldWise about 3 years ago. And in terms of the way the space has changed, I think here in the US, we're seeing a lot more organizational capacity pointed towards this issue. So that's both the number of organizations on the nonprofit side and on the for-profit side that are explicitly working to prevent or reduce food waste. But also some of the organizations we are working with have built their own capacity over time and expanded the number of staff and expanded the types of projects that they offer. Which is true of Refed in addition to some of our other partners. So I think that's one change. When we started a few years ago, honestly, it took us a while to even find sort of food waste projects, and now they're coming to us faster than we can sort of take them in, which I think is really exciting, and I think points to sort of a next generation of questions and opportunities for the space around coordination and around scaling impact and around measuring impact, and I heard a lot of those questions today. I think from a Rockefeller Foundation standpoint, the way that this work really fits into our point of view on the food system is that, like most people in this room, we believe very strongly that our food system is failing today on sort of at least two key fronts. It's unsustainable from an environmental standpoint, and it's failing to nourish the global population that we have today, not to mention the population that we're expecting to arrive shortly. So we really see food waste as a way to tackle both of those things. And I think that's why we've focused in both our Africa work and our US work on prevention, which we feel like, and that's a common theme, I'm sure you'll hear, which we feel like both preserves the most environmental resources, but also hopefully gets the most safest, highest quality food back on what I call the global table. So if we can prevent food waste farther up the chain, we're able to address some of the hunger and equity issues that we care very deeply about.
One follow-up is one of the strategies that's really consistent with Rockefeller more broadly is around place-based or city work. Can you just talk about why place-based work is an important theory of change in this space?
Yeah, I think place-based work, whether it's a city or frankly a corporation, is important because everyone is going to be the most passionate and the most effective at solutions that work for them and leveraging the community that you have in a place, whether it's a corporation, which we were talking this morning about how some of the best advocates for our corporate work have been team members that weren't even originally sort of targeted with the work that just became really passionate about it. And I think at the city level, what that work enables us to do is really tap into the amazing local and municipal level policies and innovation and existing organizations that are tackling this. And by having a city strategy, we, Rockefeller, can tap into those communities in ways that we really couldn't do at sort of a one-off level. We're not a hyper-local foundation in that way. So being able to partner with a national organization like NRDC to sort of take a city-based approach enables us to tap into that. And the hope is that when we've shown that several cities have success by combining policies and programs to prevent food waste, that other cities will see that and replicate. So that's part of this.
Eileen, Walmart came from this probably starting with a journey around hunger and feeding communities. Can you talk about, so you've been spending both food donations and dollars to build out the food recovery network and great partnership with Feeding America and many others. Can you talk about just the changes you've seen over the past several years, and even just thinking back to Monday, our innovator workshop, just all of the ideas that are surfacing and changing in this space, the innovation that's happening in the food recovery sector?
Yeah, no, that's great. And for those who sat at the food donation table at the Innovators Day, it's a little bit of a repeat, but I think there are a couple themes of things that are changing, just to keep in mind as we think about how we move into recovery of the future. I think the first, as Devon mentioned, is thinking about prevention, right? Prevention first. Like, we want to have source reduction. We need to lean into prevention strategies. I mean, when we're and that's good for many reasons, right? It's good for the environment. It's good for getting food back on the table and thinking about equity. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. And we're working on that from a business perspective when we think about taking days out of the supply chain as well as markdown programs. We're also working on it from a philanthropic standpoint, funding research and accelerating measurement movement across different entities in the supply chain can be an unlock for prevention, right? And thinking about how you change behavior, you manage what you measure. So that's a change. And I mentioned that. I know you asked me about food recovery, but I think it's important to put that context in change. We're going to have less food in the system for recovery. What we are seeing is available is highly perishable. It's different types of food than we maybe saw when food recovery started and food donation started before. So it's highly perishable, more fruits and vegetables. So what does that mean from a recovery standpoint? That's a different model. And I think when we think about a lot of the innovators we were with in the room that are really taking on, if folks who have read the New Power book, who has read New Power in this room? No one in here? No? Okay. I really encourage you to read that book. It's really talking about how you think about old power institutions versus new power institutions, and technology being an accelerant of that, of who has control of micro decisions. So when you think about companies that are popping up, like Airbnb, crowdsource function, and like a lot of the food recovery entrepreneurs are a new power model. And so tech-enabled to be able to move food quicker and faster, I think, is a huge unlock when you have recovery, and we're seeing that accelerated across. But let us not forget about the other side of that equation when it comes to food recovery, and that is starting with a human-centered approach when we think about distribution. Imagine if we designed our food distribution programs backwards from the person's point of view, and then layered technology on underneath that to think about how we move things quicker and faster. And so I think as we move into the future, being more human-centered in our approach and working backwards and using tech as an unlock in a new power model will be key when we think about the future of recovery to move fresher food quicker and faster across the system, given focus on source reduction.
Can you spell that out just a little bit more? So what's maybe a current challenge that we're facing that we're, in addition to freshness, just in that, on that distribution side of things, the human side of things? What are we trying to solve for?
I mean, I think when we think about trying to solve for, with recovery, I mean, I think people are trying to solve for different things. I think we're solving to create access to food for people who need it. Like, that's number one. So how would we design a system backwards from that? And thinking about it from that perspective. And what would your model look like? I think it would be a little different than some of the things we have in place today. And so if that's what we're trying to solve for, equitable distribution of food, design backwards. And what would your model? So does that break it down enough?
That does. And I love just thinking about, it's not just supply side of getting more food recovered, but also demand side. How are we thinking about that access, maybe in the dignity opportunities that new models will present?
And bringing those two together, right? So there's really great accelerants on recovery, but it needs to have you need to look at the demand on that backwards.
Adam, I'm going to come to you next. You have this perspective of thinking not only about, so, Eileen's thinking about, corporate strategy and how philanthropy complements that overall strategy for public good. You're seeing philanthropy and how that ladders up to impact investment and then private capital. Paint a picture for us of an analogy of where you see the maturity of this space at this point, and maybe some parallels that are relatable. Because I think I will be excited if we meet again in 2 years and we say we're not talking about 100 million and 7 or 8 venture-backed innovators, but actually we're talking double and triple and quadruple that number. So just be curious, tell us about how you're viewing the pipeline and maturity of innovation, and then that connection of philanthropic capital to private capital.
Sure, I'll start with the philanthropic side. I think philanthropic funding for programs in the food system are very mature, but the use of the word waste is new. And so I think the challenge is that every philanthropic program, at the end of it, tends to have people or the planet. And waste tends to be this thing in the middle that's this intermediary step to help those, but it doesn't tend to be on a lot of mission statements. And so part of the challenge of many of the innovators or programs, whether it's a local bootstrap compost here or some of the nonprofit versions of that, is how do you make your program that's really about waste reduction relevant to the 4 or 5 mission areas that may focus on other parts of the food system. And so I think there's a lot of framing and education and shaping to tap into. I don't think we'll ever have a ton of food waste, Rockefeller aside. I don't see $1 billion of foundations dedicating themselves to food waste philanthropy. I think the money is there if it can be framed and tapped in. On the investment side, one of my jobs here in Boston is finding and pulling new investors into food waste. One of the challenges is tends to be either a subscale or infrastructure-based investment. So you basically have anaerobic digestion projects, which is where you have some big dollars, but they tend to be kind of a blip on the infrastructure scale, or all of the innovators in the innovators database, which tend to be looking for $500,000 checks or $2 million checks. We don't have any billion-dollar food waste companies. We don't have any IPOs of food waste companies. So we kind of have an exit gap. But we have a ton of early-stage innovators, and I'm shocked, even though I've been looking for years, even at this conference, I've met a dozen new innovators popping up, and I get very excited by that. And so what I would say on the capital side is it's very easy to pull people to remember it, I think of FACT, F-A-C-T, that there's 4 other sectors that are easily pulled into food waste. The F is for food companies or food investors, like the Campbell's Soup Acres. That's the easy one, that food waste will always be part of their programming. A is for agriculture, so folks who have invested in farmland. Aaron Desatnik from Ceres here, was this large farmland investment, starts to move into food system, food efficiency. The C is for consumer products, so anyone who likes a hot, sexy brand, we see all the great ways of repurposing food to create great brands. And so that's just it's all about the brand and brand traction. And then the T is for technology. So everyone with software or an app, we just look at food waste as a great growing market with a clear business case, and we can pull you in that way.
That's wonderful. Kyle, tell us about how you've been thinking through, just first of all, the history of the CalRecycle grant program and where it's made investments, how it's funded, and then talk about just the learnings you've done so far in the program.
Sure. Well, I'll just say this is the first opportunity we've had to get at any funding that we can get out for these efforts, and it's come through the Cap and Trade program in California. And you probably many of you know about the Cap and Trade program, so I won't give you detail on that, but we were able to, over the last 4 or so years, get out about $100 million in that funding in multiple programs, 3 different programs. We first started with an organics grant program that was focused more on compost and anaerobic digestion infrastructure. And we built an interesting component into that. We built a food rescue partnership into that as well, really trying to get at disadvantaged communities and help in that area. Next, we moved into a fiber, plastic, and glass manufacturing program, and what that means, it's trying to incentivize in-state manufacturing of recycled content products using those types of materials. With that, we built in a textile component, a textile reuse component. No one bid on that one, so we may try that again, or we may not. And then our last grant program I'm most excited about right now is the Food Waste Prevention and Rescue Grant Program. That is funding, and recently we released about $9 million in grant funding to food rescue organizations that kind of goes across a large scale. We've helped fund it. Matter of fact, I'm just curious, by show of hands, how many people in this room have we funded? All right, yay, that's great. And that includes school districts. I know Oakland Unified School District is here, and San Diego Food System Alliance is here, and Food Forward is here, and there are others that we're going to be learning from in the coming months and years just how effective those programs are, and we have high optimism they're going to be fantastic, and we want to share that out as models as we potentially get additional funding over the years. But I will just say, cap and trade funding is hit or miss for us. It's subject to negotiation at the Capitol, so from year to year that number varies. I'm optimistic we're going to see maybe $25 million this coming cycle, and we can get it out in those types of grants too. I'm always interested in your feedback, especially from grantees, on how we can improve that process or how we can change our criteria to get at different types of groups to fund. I'll just mention, by way of potential additional funding, we're also working on SB 1383. Many of you have heard about that. There's a 20% edible food provision in that law, and one of the things that we're trying to do is to build a sustainable funding source in that and recognize food rescue as a formal program that local governments need to acknowledge within California and fund it as such. Just like they fund traditional curbside recycling programs, can you also fund food rescue that way too, and then make some individual decisions on how best to do that, and then grow that infrastructure within California.
That's exciting, Kyle. A couple of distinctive points. Just one is thinking about that 20% requirement for recovery of edible food is unique, and I think will lead to some really interesting and exciting innovation in California in the food recovery space. The second, I didn't want to make sure we didn't gloss over this. With your organics recycling grant program, you had a requirement or maybe the option of having some of those organics recycling companies have a partnership with a food rescue organization. Can you just describe that and maybe an example?
Yeah, correct. And through that, so our first cycle, we funded a number of compost anaerobic digestion facilities. And that's a group of people that is not accustomed to working with food rescue organizations. So that was definitely a learning experience in trying to get those groups together to partner and discuss those things. What we heard when we were out with composters and what we saw is a lot of the food coming into those facilities to be composted was beautiful, right? It's that instead of being composted, it needs to be eaten. It needs to be prevented. And through that, we started to see partnerships build. It's still a learning process, and I think we're going to see some good success out of those. Yeah.
That's great. Just as in the spirit of what we're talking about at this conference, in part collective action and partnership, just a really tangible example of an interesting, maybe unlikely partnership that you've encouraged through your funding. Let's actually, if I could get some help with mics, I'd love to open it up and see if there are 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question? Raise your hand. If not, I have several more questions that I would love to ask. Right here in the middle of the room. If you can just state your name and please your question.
My name is Lynette Johnson, and the question is for Eileen. So the Walmart Foundation's granting program changed significantly this year, so that state-level grants are now being done. It looks like you're going to choose some cities to do grants in. Mm-hmm. So we were formerly a significant for us, probably not for Walmart, recipient of state-level grant funding in several states. So it's a loss for us this year. So I'd like to hear about what the new initiative is and how that's going to, from Walmart's perspective, be better than what was there before.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. We have, and to put the context of that one program in a broader kind of programs that we have, we run, because I know not a lot of organizations interface probably with one piece, and they don't realize how it kind of fits in broadly. So we have localized giving programs through all of our stores. We have a store giving program. It's designed intentionally to respond to what are the local needs of the community, and any NGO in that local area can apply. So I encourage you all to apply to that program. We had a state giving program that I will explain kind of the rationale and why we made some adjustments and changes to that program. We also have a national and global grant making program that looks at key strategies across our global responsibility agenda. Hunger relief, food waste being 2 of the priorities, healthy eating, those are the areas I work on, food waste, food safety. And we make global grants, national grants, sometimes localized as it relates to our strategy. So that's the grant making portfolio I oversee and leverage and run with work with many people in this room. We made changes to our state giving program for a few reasons. We did some analysis and looked at, what was the acceptance rate of the program, and we found that we weren't really meeting the needs of our grantees. Some people did receive grant funding, but I think it was easier to get into Harvard than it was to get a Walmart Foundation grant from state giving, which when we think about serving customer from a grantee perspective, we were not providing a solid, experience from the grantee. So we looked at changing that program to better meet the needs of our grantees, as well as to drive impact at a deeper level. And so we chose a place-based strategy similar to how Devon discussed about going deep in a few communities, picking a topic and rolling out investments. I mean, I think one of the hard things about being a philanthropist and being in a foundation is you have to make tough choices. It's about where we put resources and time. And I'm glad we were able to support your program for all the years. And we did have bridge funding available, and so we can talk after if you'd like to about that.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, there's one in the back. If you can run that, and then we'll ask 2 questions to the panel as we follow. Let me ask one of those now, and then we'll come to that question in the audience. One is just, you have this amazing group of policymakers, innovators, fellow capital providers, and also food businesses in the room. Just wonder if you have any asks or calls to action for this group. Kyle, one of the things we've talked about is you have some peers around different states who are thinking about these same problems in the spirit of not reinventing the wheel and learning from each other. Just be curious, especially from your perspective, maybe you could kick us off, any asks that you have.
Wow. Yeah, there's probably a lot of asks. So trying to think what comes to mind first is I certainly want to hear from rescue organizations, innovators, and I did a little bit of that yesterday, what you guys need and what your interests are and how that could tie into both the policy that we're developing and also the funding that is available. Can we make it easier to access or better to access? And I don't know, one of the things that's been running through my mind is we've been contacted by a lot of philanthropic organizations over time too on how can they participate, how can they get into what we're doing in California, what's the best way to leverage that? And I still don't know what that answer is, so I don't know if people in the group know an answer to that one, but at a certain point, it would be nice to tap into that to help build upon what we're working on. We'll say what we're doing from a money perspective is a drop in the bucket. It's seed money, but how does that tie to the policy that we're making?
I have a couple thoughts. I just want to reiterate, it's been really exciting to see the momentum and energy in this space. To Devon, when we kind of started funding in this space, we had issues around kind of developing a pipeline, and now it's like, wow, this is amazing to see the energy in this room, and it's really exciting to spend time with you all. So I think we are in kind of what's the next phase of where we go to really accelerate change against the roadmap and the work. And so I think that calls for a couple pieces of action. Would love to see more impact investors and financial, kind of institutions bringing capital through that financing vehicle. But that also requires philanthropists to put up some risk capital. And kind of we spend our philanthropy playing kind of de-risking solutions that can be a market solution in the long run or taken up by another stakeholder. So I think we need a call to action for more philanthropists to kind of de-risk and kind of prove out solutions or understand those bottlenecks, and then more private capital to come in and kind of accelerate and scale. From an NGO and entrepreneur perspective, I think similar to what you were saying, Devon, earlier, and I think we have opportunity for coordination across the space, really understanding where are we really working hard and where do we have gaps and where do we coordinate, and then have strategic partnerships across to leverage strengths, because we have strengths in our entrepreneurs and then strengths in some of our partners at scale. And so how does that come together to be really an unlock for scale? And then I have one more, sorry, Chris. For the businesses in the room, I hope to see, I'm inspired by the companies in this room that really are taking a step forward and a shared value approach to think about how do we address food waste and loss within our business context for shared value for society and business. So I would love to see when we're here, couple years from now, more businesses having plans in place within their business, and it makes sense from a business value to really drive change at scale.
I would say my ask is for folks to continue to push for clarity of impact and capturing impact and reporting that back to us as funders, but also to the community at large. I think we've seen such great attention on food waste, and now we need to be able to credibly deliver on the impacts that we've sort of promised when it comes to preventing food waste. And a few of us were chatting about this earlier. It's really hard to measure prevention. And so it's going to be a challenge. I think it's going to take some time for us to get it right. But I think that's really important for everyone that's working on food waste to be thinking about, and is a question we'll be asking and people should continue to ask of us. So I think that's my ask.
Yeah, I'll just say, if you have a great company, come to me. But I was actually reflecting on when we launched the Refed roadmap a couple of years ago. We were very excited. We were in the Bay Area. We had a smaller version of this event. And, we had done all the hard work to show how you could there was a clear path to this 20% national reduction. And this young man in the back of the room stood up. I think he was from Denmark. Jesse, I don't know if you remember, but he kind of timidly said, but in Denmark, we're already like 70% below the US. Why only a 20% goal? This is so easy. We've shown in Denmark you can get to 70%. And sometimes that's how it feels, and that every person in this room is clawing and fighting for every little bit of food donated here and a little $9 million grant program here. And we're all so fragmented. And I think what we're really doing is fighting us as a community of 300 people for this issue that's kind of complex, and there's a lot of different ways you can approach it, but we're kind of this rallying cause about, wow, if we can all be like Denmark, we can really change the world. And it's just this group of people. And so I think that sometimes it's just that there's some simplicity to fight through the complexity about getting where we need to go.
Christina? Or there's a question in the back? Go
Hi,
ahead.
I'm Ellie from San Diego Food System Alliance. So we generously received a grant from CalRecycle for our Smart Kitchen San Diego initiative with Lean Path and our local food bank. I think it's amazing to have the local government be really involved in this issue, but because it comes from certain funding stream, cap and trade, we have to be accountable for greenhouse gas emission reductions, tonnage, and also since it's a one-time grant, it's mostly infrastructure, so it doesn't really fund too much on the staffing side. So we were very lucky to have a private foundation support us in terms of the education and outreach that's needed in the community for prevention work. So that's our kind of way of getting the different revenue streams to work for our purposes. And I'm curious to hear, and I'm so thankful that Refed is facilitating all the different types of funders. And I'm curious to hear of examples from your work where you've been able to leverage those types of public and private funding relationships in food waste.
Yeah, I can. It's a really tangible example, and I think FAR is in the room. So we, a lot of times, in a couple of grants, both on food waste and loss, but as well as on some soil health work, have been the private match for the FAR public grant program. And so I think it's a great example of a public-private partnership, and it's great to, we don't, when you think about sustainability of funding sources from a nonprofit, as a funder, we like to see different resources brought to the table and woven together because from a sustainability perspective. And so we look for those opportunities, and it's great when they come together. And that's why I really appreciate the diversity of funders on this panel.
I give one other example. One of the funders that we've worked with was looking at supporting an innovator, Compost Nashville in Tennessee, who had availability of a matching grant from the State Department of Environmental Protection, but needed that private match. So I think that actually, not only with FAR, but sometimes at that state level, can be some tangible examples. Let me end with one final question. Would love to hear just where you hope we're heading with funding in this space. And if we meet back in 2 years and kind of are doing the same exercise around looking back at progress, taking stock, what do you hope we'll be able to say?
I think to really hit sustainable, to use Eileen's word, scale, we need to start seeing funding that's coming from within businesses or within governments as part of sort of business as usual. I think what we're seeing right now, which is great in the sort of interim period, is a lot of food waste funds or funds available for food waste on a philanthropic basis. And I think that's great for testing solutions, piloting, pushing other stakeholders beyond their comfort zone as they're learning and being sort of the risk capital. But over time, I would love to see businesses saying, we're committing 1% of our operating costs to our ongoing food waste reduction, or government saying we're now making it part of our sustainability plan that gets this large envelope, and food waste is a part of that. I just think even at a global scale, we're going to need to get bigger long-term financing available. And so what we should strive for over the next couple of years is to show that that's a smart choice and use philanthropic capital and impact investing to prove that that's a smart choice and that we have solutions that can really work and have impact.
I agree, everything Devon said. And I think we need to start, I hope to see solutions at scale, as well as different financing coming in to support that with, I think we as philanthropists need to put the risk capital up. But as a part of that, we need the plans for scale. We need the program, we need the projects for scale. And it doesn't mean you have it all figured out, but understanding what is your theory of action of how you're going to get there. What model are we trying to prove out? What's the sustainable financing plan? What capital market are you trying to unlock? And then as you're learning, what are the insights that you're generating that we need to have real-time learning? I mean, I know you were going to ask us a question about how we measure, and I think there's quantifiable measure, and we need to have that to unlock those capital markets. But while we're doing that, we need the insights to help us get to the models at scale to unlock these other capital markets.
Okay. I'd like to come back in a couple of years and report out some success stories from our grant program. I'd like to also be able to point to, hopefully, 100 new compost facilities within the state of California that are producing compost that's feeding and making healthy soil. I'd like to see prevention prioritized too, and how that relates to existing rescue programs as well. But I'd really like to see a more sustainable funding source for a lot of these organizations that are out there. I think maybe that'll come through our efforts with SB 1383 that we're working on. So a lot of high hopes.
And I want to see some accusations of there being a food waste bubble of investment, of hype of food waste. In the food world, this has happened with food delivery companies, many of which you guys have used. With meal kits, there might be some Blue Apron or the other 20 meal kit companies. We want to see people starting food waste companies because there's too much money to get, and the valuations are too high. We're starting, I think, Appeal Science is a great company that's having huge success. There's a number of companies around the freshness and the perishable supply chain and around marketing imperfect produce. That's an area that I could see being a hot investment area. A number of great software and logistics companies around food recovery supply chain. So I'm very hopeful that we're going to get there.
One of my hopes in 2 years is that we both see the scale you just described, Adam, especially in the venture space. And I think you mentioned meal kits. I was just at Future Food Tech, where plant-based protein sort of experiencing that maybe that next wave or bubble. So hopefully we're in that situation in 2 years. I also hope we see connections between forms of capital. So I love that the Appeal Sciences story last week in the Washington Post talked about the role that foundations played in addition to venture capital. And I thought that was just, and the fact that it came from, back to one of the sessions on research, that it came from a group of PhDs at UC Santa Barbara. So I think that to me is such a great forerunner for us to look at as the type of success we hope we're talking about in multitudes in 2 years. So please join me in thanking our panel. There is now a reception in the school courtyard. Can someone instruct me, is that here or downstairs? Downstairs, okay. Please do.
Oh my God, I was waiting over there. All right. So the reception, the best way to get there is actually to go through this courtyard right outside where many people had lunch and skipped the working groups. So just go straight across there, and then to the left there's steps. We'll have some people helping. I want to make two other quick announcements. One is just there's 2 buses back to the Hyatt, one leaving at 5:10, so very shortly. If you follow the group down there, you'll actually be close to where the buses are. They're where you were dropped this morning, and our same volunteers can direct you. So there's a bus at 5:10 and a bus at 6:30 leaving down from where the reception is. And then lastly, just if you have a table with materials out there, we actually have to break down all of those tables. So if you can grab those before the reception and then, of course, bring them back tomorrow. We just don't have a place to keep them all. Okay, that's all that I had to announce. I believe. Thank you to the panel. Thank you for a great day. We will have a drink.
Nice to meet you all.
Chris, can I say?